Okay, this is video number 2. Due to some reformatting issues with the Surface, I will be briefly reviewing some of the underlying code for the application. And just to kind of refresh where we were last time, because I don't think we got to see, the login aspect. There is a user authentication, piece to this. It also has not been heavily styled, but let's go ahead and put in the wrong password just to demonstrate that. So we do have that piece there. I did want to demonstrate that briefly, and I think that's a good starting point to discuss some of the underlying code. As I discussed briefly in the last video, I am using the MVVM design pattern. And basically with that, we're separating our models from our view models, which in layman's terms basically means that we're separating our presentation from our UI logic from our underlying data. So the views folder here basically contains all of our actual user interfaces. So in the case of what we just saw, the authentication UI shouldn't really show anything because a lot of this is data driven. But the user authentication UI is shown here. So this is the actual user interface itself, and you can kind of see the placeholders for the data driven elements like the image, username, etc. Then we have our models, which in this case the authentication page has a corresponding authentication page view model. The view model encapsulates all of our user authentication logic. Basically, it goes and gets all of our data using an iUser repository interface, which I'm going to cover in a moment. And basically, you can see that it retrieves a user, and then we have a couple properties here: the user image, the full name. I think it's pretty easy to understand that those are all pieces of data that we actually need in our user interface. Then we go to our services folder, which basically holds anything that has to do with data. So in this case, we have a iPlaylist repository interface, and an interface is basically just a contract that says which methods that a class is going to implement. So in this case, our iPlaylist repository has add, remove, update, and load, which is analogous to basically your basic CRUD operations. If you're thinking about it in a SQL sense, which I think everybody's kind of familiar with. Then if we actually go to the playlist repository itself, this is where those methods are actually implemented. So initialization, I'm actually using local storage and JSON. That's how all of my objects are actually being stored. Then I remove our updates, load, etc. And the load basically deserializes the JSON objects from the playlist.json file, which we can actually view here. So, and I think this will make a little bit more sense if we actually look at the model. So our playlist is basically has a playlist ID, a name, a list of songs. I've removed this from the time being just to limit that, because we're going to build on that a little bit more as we add in the effective infotainment functionality. And then if we actually go back to the JSON file, we can kind of see where that's represented: the ID, the name, and then the collection of songs. So same thing, our song class, a song ID, a file name, and a display name. As you see, we don't have an actual representation for the song itself, because the songs themselves are being imported into the system and stored within local storage. So really all we need is a file name, because we know exactly where that file exists. So, and that is basically that. We have a common folder. We're not using a lot of this because we're actually using the Prism design guidance, and we're using a library which contains a number of classes that makes it a little bit easier to actually implement that MVVM design pattern, for Windows Runtime or Windows Stores applications. So we're not using a lot of this default, a lot of this default stuff. And in fact, this application is somewhat streamlined because I like to build blank applications to the degree possible, so I'm not adding in things that I'm not necessarily using. So you don't see a whole lot of templates here other than the absolute bare minimum that we need to make the application run. Everything else I've only added as I've needed it. So that is that.